Right.
So why is this book so highly praised, do you think? Do most people relate to Ignatius? Is that why?
Oh, I don't think most people relate to Ignatius at all. I think he's horrible. He's difficult. He's obnoxious. He's causing trouble everywhere he goes. He's pretentious, and I think people actually enjoy disliking him. I find very few people can relate to Ignatius. Have you read it?
Yes.
Yes.
And I would definitely say the opposite for sure.
Yeah. Actually, most people, because this book actually pops up not just as a top 10 book to read in the United States, but it actually pops up as a UK, like European, specifically British humor. And I think it's the humor that speaks to people more, like the generic, like almost like the comicalness of the absurdity of what he is always engaging in and all the trouble he's getting into and the trouble he causes. I think speaks more than anybody relating to him directly.
Would anybody be paying any attention to this book if the author hadn't committed suicide?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I think so. I think the humor is almost universal. You know, if you like absurd humor, slapstick, difficult people, I think it's gonna speak to you. Yeah.
Do you think Ignatius could be on the spectrum and a part of the LGBT community, particularly asexual or
No, that's actually, no one's ever really talked about that. There's something there. I don't know. I haven't perceived him from that. I read the book 25 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, before I lived in New Orleans. And I think that's the other thing. I think that so I don't know that to address that specifically, I hadn't really thought about that. I don't know if that language existed when I read it 30 years ago. And but the thing I think about is people think of New Orleans as a literary community fights above its weight. Like, people think of New Orleans so much as like a place, and I think he captured the place, or he captured a particular person capturing a place, right? But New Orleans as a place is also a huge draw to the book, so I think that to me is more also part of the appeal. Yeah.
Tool uses great comedic efforts to depict how people view the French Quarter and New Orleans as a whole in the 20th century. As very conservative, but also like a rebellious city when it comes to gay people in New Orleans. How do you think that this has impacted people, maybe a part of the LGBT community or conservative people in New Orleans back in the 20th?
Well, I mean, all that stuff when he was writing. I mean, the oh my gosh, Robert Feisler had written about the Tinderbox, a book Tinderbox about the gay community in the French Quarter that was deeply persecuted at the time. Are you familiar with the gay club Fire? Where the people they didn't put the fire out and they locked the doors and basically in the 80s and let them burn. And so they're being open with alcoholism did not translate into being open with the gay community at all. It was deeply repressed and deeply persecuted. So that was not acceptable at the time. So yeah, I mean, there was a lot of that going on in the Quarter. There was a lot of pain there.
I did read Alicia P. Long's Queer Fairies and Near Duel. By Alicia P. Long. She has kind of like a historic take to like.
Yeah, the book called Tinderbox would also probably speak to you. Would put together the gay experience in the late 70s, early 80s by Bobby Feisler. He's here locally, and he's done a lot of work, especially in the drag community. And then there's also a book called Let the Faggots Burn, and that's a lot of the people didn't come to pick up the bodies. But the Catholic Church would not acknowledge the gay men that had died in those fires. And I mean, it was really terribly tragic. There's actually a plaque that members of the community finally got into the ground, and some jerk stole the other day, and they had to get a new one because people were terrible. And so yeah, if you wanted to add that, if that was personally of interest to you, or just academically, I think those would be a really great addition to looking at this from a queer perspective. Yeah.
Why do you think Ignatius resists alienating labor? Is it because his body prevents him from working, or he just uses that as an excuse to be lazy?
I think he is internally more sloth than anything else. Yeah, and I think he would use the word sloth. He's very Catholic. I mean, there's a Catholicism I think in there too. There's the sins. The idea of sin is very much in there, and I think that John Kennedy Toole wrestled with sin, and I think he let Ignatius be sloth. I do. I think that was a purpose. I mean, I could read into it. I don't know. I always felt that was purposeful.
And throughout the book, well, Ignatius has like a weird relationship with Myrna.
Yeah.
And
Myrna Maycock, what a terrible person too. Everybody's terrible.
And towards the end of the book, she said it kind of hints at him maybe having sex, maybe, because you know how
sure.
the beginning, Myrna gives him like 3 options to maybe like try, which was obviously having sex, and then what was it? I guess getting out of New Orleans, of course, and then I guess finding something else besides like focusing on something else besides himself. So he did those 2 things besides having sex. So do you think like toward the end of the book when at the end when he's like rubbing Myrna's hair against his mustache at the end, do you think like he maybe one day may try?
Maybe. I don't know. I think you have to fill in that blank yourself. It's ambiguous, and I do think there's a lot of shame in there too. You know, so yeah, maybe.
Which character do you find the most relatable or intriguing throughout the book?
I don't find any of them relatable. No, I do find them amusing, and maybe it's because I stand back from them. I'm not from here. I mean, I've lived here for almost 30 years, but I still, part of the community. But I don't have family roots, deeper roots. I just always found it amusing, just like almost to be an outsider looking in.
Yeah, for sure. How accurately do you think the book captures the essence of New Orleans and specifically the French Quarter?
I think it's a very specific time and place. I don't know that locals live in the French Quarter the way that they used to. There are actually quite a few books on people who raised. I mean, the fact that there's still an elementary school in the French Quarter is pretty remarkable. But it did used to be a place where locals lived and raised their children and had normal lives, whereas now I think we look at the French Quarter as a commercial corridor, more of a party central, but it was a place where people absolutely raised their kids, and I miss that opportunity. Like I don't know the French Quarter like that. Yeah.
And lastly, have you visited any landmarks mentioned in the book, and how does it compare? Like Uptown, how gentrified it is now.
I mean, I've visited 2, so I've been to the statue on Canal Street, of course, and then I live in the neighborhood. I live in Carrollton, and there is a plaque for where the family lived. I also have some personal, so I've been to that. There is a plaque on Hampson, on one of the houses there, that John Kennedy Toole lived there. So those are my only like sites that I've seen. And then I have some personal experience with, I have several, after he passed, his mother was very much after Kennedy Toole passed, his mother was a character herself, very much a character herself, and she did a lot of book signings where she would run out of books and then just like lean over and grab books off of his bookshelf and like just write in them and give them to people, and I've actually had several of those come back. It's very strange.
How do you feel about Mrs. Riley? Like in the book, who's supposed to be Ignatius' mom, but also
everybody get into his mother issues, which they were real, and I think I'm sympathetic towards. Yeah.
Okay, well, I definitely thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. It was fun. I always want to reread it again as a local.
Yeah.
You know, I think it'd be a fun. I have several really collectible copies, and I do enjoy how much travelers enjoy it. Yeah.
I get how like the book is so funny, but then again, it's like rereading the first time. I was like, because of how like the language is in the book.
Yeah,
I've never
strange.
Heard, so I was like, kind of have to go back and read over. I'm like,
the vernacular is weird. I know. Are you local?
I'm from Lafayette. But I've been here. Well, I've been outside, like right in the West Bay area.
Sure. Yeah.
Come here often, but not local.
No, it feels very specific. Like it feels very, and even if you were local, I don't know that any of us really have had that particular experience. Like that feels like very time and place. Like a very time and place experience for like it feels like a very small circle, you know? Yeah. So I think, like I said, just
so you read the Confederacy of Dunces book by John Kennedy Toole?
I did.
Okay.
It's been a while. It's been a little bit. But yeah.
Okay. So why is this book so highly praised? Do most people relate to Ignatius? Is that the reason why?
I think the reason it's so highly praised is because of how funny it is. It's so funny. It was to me. And I think that's been a big part of it in his writing, is that he's a very comedic author who, I would say, sees things in this person and characters that other people can't see. Relating to Ignatius, maybe not quite as much, because he's like a character. So I don't know if I, like, when reading it, saw myself in Ignatius, but really enjoyed going on this ride with him.
Okay. Do you think Ignatius could be on the spectrum and a part of the LGBT world, or specifically like asexual, maybe, or aromantic?
Definitely. I mean, when I read it, again, probably 10 years ago, that wasn't something that crossed my mind, but for sure, probably on the spectrum. Part of the community, LGBT community, I don't know. I'd have to read it again to really like and pay attention, looking at it through that lens to see, but it's possible. I think not coming out and saying it specifically doesn't mean that he's not, but I'd have to do like a deeper dive to be sure.
Okay. Would anybody be paying attention to this book if the author hadn't committed suicide, do you think?
That's a good question. I mean, it is a very well written book and super funny. So I think so, but I don't think, I mean, this phrase weird, I don't think it hurt that happened and like people took notice, you know, and like got the book some popularity. But I don't think that's the only reason, no.
Okay. Do you think this novel has depicted the way of the French Quarter is perceived today, or has it in any way shaped people's views of the French Quarter, perhaps?
I think today, probably not. This is like very specific to this time period, it felt like. I don't think reading this now, like if somebody's like, I want to go to New Orleans, I'm going to read this book to see what it's like, I don't think it would be a good depiction of what it's like now.
But people, good depictions of like people outside of New Orleans or Louisiana are like reading the book, they're like, it's probably different.
Yeah, I think it, hopefully they would think it's different. I don't know, I mean, it was like a fun time period in the book and it was fun to read about, but even when I read it back then, it didn't feel like this is the New Orleans I'm familiar with, you know?
Why do you think Ignatius resists alienating neighbor? And do you think he can work, or is it just him being lazy, or his body's actually preventing him from actually working?
Could be a little bit of both. It might have started off as the body preventing him, and then he's like, well, I can just use this as an excuse and I can be lazy and not have to do anything now. Yeah, I don't know. Again, I think that would be a fun way to reread it too and think about that specifically, but I don't think it's one or the other necessarily.
Thank you. I appreciate the
no problem.
interview.
I hope it did all right.
Yeah, she did great.
All right. Thanks for coming in.
Yeah. So I have this assignment for English class, and it's just to ask you a few questions about the Confederacy against this book and what you think about it. So why is this book so highly praised, and do you think most people relate to it because of Ignatius, the character?
So I think the praise comes twofold. The story of the book itself gives it its own. There's a lot of praise gained just from the story itself, that it's an author who passed away, his mother found the book in the sock drawer. I mean, it's the sort of the unlikely tale of the book's existence in print. The story itself, I think, I always look at Ignatius and think more like Gulliver or Don Quixote. Like he's not a real person. He's just sort of on an adventure, creating havoc more than anything else. And there's no other American novel like it. In part because the author wasn't a part of 20th century arts and letters for the most part. He was outside of the norm. He was not a darling of the New Yorker or the literary conventions of the time.
Alright, and would anybody be paying any attention to this book if the author hadn't committed suicide?
That's a big question. when it was originally accepted for publication, I think it would have gotten some, but not nearly as much attention. I think it would be a beloved local novel. Some New Orleanians would know about it. I don't even know that it would be taught in schools. But then there would be a small niche cult of people who, this book is great. If you haven't read it, you should read it. Which is how the book has survived, even though it is a famous book. Because it's famous and then it goes away. And then that niche cult helps people rediscover it about every 5 or so years.
Right. Do you think Ignatius could be on the spectrum or part of the LGBT world, specifically asexual maybe?
I think he's deeply asexual. He is he's sort of a blank slate depending on the situation he's put in. So sometimes he is like an infant, and then other times he is the patriarchy, and other times he's kind of whatever the situation needs him to be. He's weaponized in that way.
Then towards the end of the book, did it kind of suggest to you that he may try having sex, maybe? Did he may try being sexual?
I could see him trying and failing miserably. His caloric valve acting up, or just the idea of Ignatius removing the hat and the scarf and the coat, and it's a lot of layers. It's very Victorian. It's I don't like his odds, and I think if he did have sex, he wouldn't like it. Yeah, he lived. So it's a line in the first paragraph, but a rich inner life, and if he a bodily activity just wouldn't even appeal to him. But if he could find somebody who challenged him or interested in him mentally, and made him step outside of his inner life, perhaps. But that's not the point of the book. I think it's not a love story.
What do you think the point of the book is?
I've read it enough times now. I think there are a few things that work. One of the the most interesting idea to me right now is the character of Jones. So it's very early in the book, but it's the two people who were arrested on Canal Street after the riots started. Jones and the dad from Metairie, and so they're sitting in the police station. These guys are looking club cards. Like, I'm a member of society. I should not be in a police station. And Jones says arrested for something he didn't do. Interesting. He's saying hi to every cop, teenage boy, but that's his experience. He knows you can get arrested for stuff you don't do all the time. And when Jones shows up and he doesn't want to get in trouble for something he's doing, he sort of points Ignatius in that direction. And he's being used to allow for the city's permissive activities to continue.
Later on in the book, Dorian Green is revealed. How do you think he impacted Ignatius' life in any way?
I never really thought about it. I don't know, what do you think?
I don't know. He's very flamboyant. He's very charismatic. I don't know. He definitely lives for the French, like the ways of the French Quarter, and lives honestly out there. So I don't know. Maybe. I'm not sure.
I think if Ignatius has a rich inner life, then Dorian has the rich outer life. So he's a foil. They're a foil for each other. But Ignatius desires or requires a foil. He's just, nope, I don't like this. I'm gonna ignore that you exist.
Do you think this novel has depicted the way the French Quarter is perceived today, or has it in any way shaped people's views of the French Quarter so far? Or people who have read it?
For people who have read it, it's also never that far from New Orleans. Like the French Quarter of the Confederacy of Dunces is, it's in the margins still.
Yeah.
Everybody, it's a hustle economy out here, and so it's.
So not many people outside of Louisiana and New Orleans have really like gone like sat down and read it and been like, oh, like I believe the French Quarter is this certain way because of this book or something.
I think oftentimes people from outside who have never been to the French Quarter, been to New Orleans, they read it and think it's fiction, and then they visit and they're like, oh, okay, there are characters everywhere. Not the same characters as there were in 1968, but they're still out there.
And this is a similar question. Toole uses great comedic efforts to depict how people view the French Quarter in New Orleans of the 20th century as it's very conservative but rebellious city, right? How do you think it has impacted people a part of the LGBTQ community and conservative people in New Orleans?
I think that it does a pretty good job. Like Ignatius is not always. I know in 2019, 2020, there were two competing articles that came out about the same week apart, a week apart from each other. One said that Ignatius would be a Trump-supporting MAGA guy, and another person said he would be Antifa. So two extremes, but opposite sides of the spectrum, and they both made good arguments for both. Because he's an extreme character, he's a comedic character, so everything about him is exaggerated, physically, verbally, opinion-wise, and that conservatism in the city, when it's put to an extreme, becomes absurd. And the permissiveness of the culture of the city, when pushed to an extreme, becomes absurd. And for most people who live here and have lived here, they can go, that's funny, that's hilarious. I'm not going to change anything about it, but that's funny, that's hilarious. And I don't know, I don't think it's like most satires, there is perhaps a goal in mind to change things, but very little changes. Because people read a satire and they go, this is hilarious. They don't read it and go, oh, that clothing manufacturer, Levi Pant, well, that was a real place, and they had the longest running court case in American history at one point. The National Labor Review Board versus Rudder Rex clothing manufacturer. They made pants for the Korean War. They fired their unionizing employees during a hurricane because they didn't call in to say they weren't coming to work. The city was without power for a month, but they didn't call in, so you're fired. It went from 1954 to 1989.
Wow.
And that's something that, as he was writing that book, he would have known about. Everybody in town would have known about it. But history kind of forgets about it, right? But it's funny, it's so funny, but it also does have a point. This ineptitude that runs throughout, this idea of unionizing the people, like, it's not just jokes, it does have a point. It's buried. You have to look for the teeth.
And this kind of leads into my next question, which is, why do you think Ignatius resists alienating labor? And do you think he can work or just be lazy, or his body actually prevents him from working?
So the character of Ignatius, if he was presented more realistically, he could probably lift a car and throw it over his head if he felt like it, but he doesn't feel like it. A lot of his health issues are related to his laziness. And that's not just people who are unhealthy or lazy, but I think specifically him. Yeah, I mean, he's having issues that are related to his inaction. He doesn't want to work. What happens to him at the end of the book?
So we just got towards the end of the book, and I think the last line was him saying like he was like rubbing Myrna's braid around like to his wet nose, to his wet mustache. So I'm thinking that he could, like, you know how Myrna said there's 3 things he needs to do. He needs to have sex, he needs to get out of New Orleans, explore, and he needs to I guess focus on something other than himself. I guess a cause or something. So he did the focusing on something that like a different cause or something other than himself, and he did get out of New Orleans. So I'm wondering if maybe he will honestly like have sex, like maybe with Myrna or not, maybe explore that, because I mean it did how he was saying that he was not really okay with bodily food, like, you know.
But it ends on sort of a very sensual, like intimate image, and so the idea is, well, maybe he will explore these things.
Yeah.
And you know, the permissive and also conservative nature of the city, and that it lives sort of in conflict with itself all the time. But yeah, maybe you just need to get out of there, and then without that conflict, you can just be a normal, productive person. There are also people who read the ending of the book as Myrna is an angel of death.
I didn't get that.
Yeah, so Myrna means death, and he's flirting with death. He's, because he, you know, oh, Myrna. She's sort of throughout the book, but she don't meet her until the very end. And around the same time that the book came out, there was also this, it was a code for suicide called A Night Bus to the Afterlife. It's shown up, it's continued to be used. There was a film that came out 20 years ago called Ghost World, where the character goes to a bus stop and, you know, like, oh, the bus stop picking up there, years ago. And then the bus shows up and she's the only passenger and she leaves. End of film. And Ignatius, who couldn't be anywhere near a vehicle, is now just smitten and happy and fine. So, is it Myrna, or is Myrna something else? Like I think if you take that idea and combine it with Tool's story, there's something there potentially. I don't know if I believe it.
It's a fun question. Do you think that the book and the story is cursed? You think it's cursed because of the multiple films that they've tried to make, but has it gone right?
Yeah. Well, you know, they were going to make a movie of the biography of Tool. So there's a book called Butterfly and the Typewriter, and they had directors, producers. Susan Sarandon was going to play Thelma. Nick Offerman was going to play a professor that Tool had met in Vietnam. They were set to start filming in April of 2020. Actors had flown to town. Pre-production was over. Let's start filming April of 2020. Whole world shuts down. Nothing has been said since.
Yeah, and then the two actors who did OD, so it's kind of like, oh, I wonder if they're gonna ever. Do you think they're gonna ever, like, possibly potentially make one?
So I was talking with somebody who looked into it. Like, this has been my favorite book my entire life, and I'm in filmmaking, and I want to make this movie. So we actually looked into it. Since the book was published in 1980, the film rights were bought almost instantly to make it into a movie. Famously John Belushi and Chris Farley, even Philip Seymour Hoffman at one point, so it was actually 3 overdoses. But every time a studio wants to make it, decides they don't want to, and sells the right to another studio, they take something called points. So if you make it and it makes $20 million, I get 1% of that $20 million. But from 1980 to now, enough studios have bought in and sold out that the points on it, it could be the highest grossing film of all time, and the studio that made it wouldn't make any money. So it probably would be done.
I think it could probably be done.
It's yeah. I think it could be done. There was a stage version of it that was done a few years ago. It was very well received. I think of the actors who have been reported to play Ignatius, I think Philip Seymour Hoffman was the guy to have done it, but there will be others to come around. People who just, larger than life, but also really small. And I've been around, especially New Orleans, intellectual class around long enough that I've met Ignatius over a dozen times. He exists. He walks among us.
Yeah.
So it's somebody who has a really great entertainment lawyer, and somebody who knows the city well enough. They can make that movie. They make that movie, no problem.
All right. Well, I appreciate you for your time.
That's no problem.
And what's your name again?
Jeff.
Jeff. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Alana.
Alana.
All right.